Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now we introduce our guest and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. What happens when a co-op or condominium sponsor cannot pay maintenance or the underlying mortgage? How can apartment owners protect their financial investments and the well-being of their buildings? What action is the Attorney General's office taking to set up new guidelines and rules for sponsor disclosures? We'll answer these questions and more when we look at the fast-growing problem in the real estate market, sponsor default. Our guests are Frederick Melman, Assistant Attorney General of the State of New York and in charge of the Real Estate Financing Bureau, and Aaron Ziegelman, President of Ziegelman Organization, one of the major converters of apartments in the city of New York. Aaron, what is the status now of the real estate market, co-op and condominium in the city?
Well, I believe the real estate conversion market, co-ops, I think has a cold, maybe the flu. But I believe the cures that are being proposed, chemotherapy might kill the patient.
Well, Fred, how do you feel about the chemotherapy that Aaron is indicating? What's your perspective of what's happening in the market?
My perspective is that there's a serious problem that many sponsors are having and that many buildings are having. I think that the term co-op crisis, which has been bandied about quite often, is perhaps an exaggeration. The situation we have now is in the Attorney General's office. We're looking into default cases by about 65 different sponsors in approximately 200 buildings, which is undoubtedly a serious problem. It's a serious problem for the people in those buildings, for the people who might want to buy apartments in those buildings. But when you look at the number of co-ops and condominiums in New York City and throughout the metropolitan area, it's not an epidemic.
Aaron,
and I agree with Aaron.
Aaron, take us through it. What happens when a sponsor defaults on his mortgage or on maintenance payments?
There are many remedies for the co-op, and they don't have to resort to the drastic actions or follow the proposal by Fred in the requirement of the amendment that he's requiring us to do. First of all, a co-op board, if the sponsor does not pay his maintenance, they have a rent assignment. They can collect the rent from the tenant that lives there. Two, they can get those units, they can foreclose on the units. If a bank holds the mortgage, the bank will either make the payments or they come before the bank. That's the most interesting part. The co-op has a first lien on those units. And I and a number of other people in the business, if a co-op takes back the units and they want, in most instances, they want the maintenance brought up to date, we buy them and it would be a very good deal for
Aaron,
us.
but couldn't that take months, if not years, sometimes in litigations if a co-op tries to foreclose on a developer?
Not on the developer. You mean on the owner
sponsor?
of occupied apartments? Yeah. I'm not an attorney, but I don't believe it would take years.
Fred?
Perhaps not years, but it's not a quick fix. It could take some time. And the problem that these co-ops face is that there often can be a substantial negative cash flow between the income that is realized as rents from occupied apartments and what the maintenance might be. And very often it's the sponsors of these buildings where there is a sharp negative cash flow who are experiencing financial difficulty. And just taking back the occupied apartments may not provide the relief that an apartment corporation needs because it's just putting them in that same negative cash flow position.
Aaron, I see you want to respond.
I don't agree with that. Even when there is a negative cash flow, there are buyers. It's true, they won't pay a big price for the apartment, but if they're going to pay even 20 cents on the dollar...
These are buyers of occupied apartments.
Yes, buyers of... Look, the ownership of an occupied apartment is very similar to a zero-coupon bond. You don't realize any income, but as time goes on and the apartment vacates, and if you buy it for a big discount, you're going to realize a profit.
But Aaron, isn't it true that if that apartment is rent stabilized or rent controlled, that tenant can stay there almost in perpetuity, forever?
Well, nothing is forever, obviously.
Well, at least for the near 10, 15, 20 years.
That's fine. Sure. That's fine. So if you buy it at the right price, if you wait 10, first of all, not every person stays that long. If you buy enough apartments, the law of averages will be such, like in my buildings, I have a 6% vacancy turnover, and if that occurs, that's ample enough to enable me to own an occupied apartment, almost like a zero coupon bond. Now, of course, Fred is talking about the deficiency between rent and maintenance, which we have major deficiencies in some buildings, but nevertheless, if you gave the professionals in the business those units for nothing, they will factor in the deficiency and still feel that it's a fairly good buy.
Fred, if one of our viewers is out there and they want to buy a co-op, and they're looking at 5, 6 different co-ops in 5 or 6 different buildings, how do they know if that particular building has a problem with their sponsor or not?
As of June 1st, the Attorney General has required that all offering plans be amended to contain more complete, more updated financial disclosure. Under previous regulations, if the sponsor was having a problem and not paying maintenance, that was an item that had to be disclosed. Under the recently promulgated rules, the sponsors are also going to have to disclose what this negative cash flow is in the particular building, whether they have pledged their occupied apartments to banks, whether they are current in those payments, whether they are current in other buildings, other co-ops and condos that they might own, so somebody can get a pretty good picture. It's critical, I think, and I don't think anyone will disagree with this, that anyone interested in buying a co-op or a condo ought to look at the offering plan very closely. Ought to look at the recent amendments to the offering plan, ought to look at the financial statements that are coming out of the building to see if the building is operating with a positive cash flow, and to see if there's any disclosure of financial difficulties.
Fred, if I just maybe point out, the New York Times, last in their Sunday edition, had on their auction page, was auctioning off the interest of a large developer in Brooklyn. Manufacturers Hanover held the mortgage, and they were selling it at auction.
Right.
Now, what does that mean as far as the tenants and the owners who are not the developer who live in that building?
It may mean nothing. Foreclosure, people hear the red flag of foreclosure and think that that can affect the co-op. Well, in many cases, these foreclosures take place because sponsors are not paying loans that are secured by unsold shares in the apartment. Where that happens, what we have seen is very often banks step in, and as Aaron has said, there are banks, there are developers willing to step in to make maintenance payments and bring the building current. The real issue is the building current? Is there a maintenance shortfall? Have reserve fund and working capital fund payments been made? And does a purchaser have a sound expectation that these payments will be made by the sponsor in the future?
Aaron?
The problem, Fred, I know that the proposed amendments are meant to protect the consumer, and look, we in the industry are very much for it because the consumer that's protected is good for the industry. However, I believe some of the points in your proposal is like shooting a fly with an elephant gun. For example, but I'll come to the examples in a minute, but what concerns me the most and should concern every owner, co-op owner, not sponsor owner, is because these amendments will discourage people from buying a resale an apartment in the building, and that would be a very, very terrible thing to do. Because let's take some of the clauses in your proposed amendment. Disclose that you borrowed money against your occupied apartments. There's nothing dangerous about that, because if you don't pay the bank takes over, maybe you're better off. But a person buying in that building, he says, wait a minute, this sponsor hacked his shares, I'm not buying there. The person that's going to be hurt is the person who lives in that building, the owner occupied, and he won't be able to sell his units, and the sponsor, when he has a vacancy, won't be able to sell his unit, and that will only aggravate the problem, not help it.
Fred, how do you respond to that?
If giving people full information is going to make them make a decision that's adverse to a particular building, there is nothing that we can do about that. I think saying that we shouldn't give people information because that might have some damaging effect on the market
I did not say that,
is
Fred.
just
Oh,
really wrong.
no.
We're going to have to take a break now, but we're going to cover that right after this break. You're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Stay with us.
There's a reason people whisper when they tell you a rumor. It's because 9 times out of 10, It's not true. Take all the rumors about AIDS. People are saying you can catch AIDS from a mosquito bite or in swimming pools. The fact is, there isn't a single case of AIDS on record caused by casual contact. It's up to you. You can believe the rumors, or you can get the facts.
Rumors are spreading faster than AIDS. Call your local Red Cross for the facts.
The party's over. All over, one for the road. All over for the 25,000 Americans who die each year as the result of drivers who drink. Drivers who don't realize how little it takes to turn the average social drinker into a tragedy. So please, take this advice from this station and the members of the New York State Bar Association. When in doubt, don't start out.
And now a word from the American Lung Association. Your lungs are an incredible piece of machinery, but your lungs are also incredibly delicate. Diseases of the lung are among the most frequent causes of suffering, disability, and death in the United States. Lung cancer is now the #1 cancer killer in America among both men and women. Chronic bronchitis and emphysema are marked by chronic obstruction to the airflow. Among chronic diseases, asthma is the leading cause of school absenteeism. Yes, TB is still with us. In the past year, over 22,000 Americans have contracted TB. Lung trouble can come from the air you breathe at work, but thanks to the American Lung Association, you can breathe a little easier. They're working to fight all this lung disease. Your lungs are a miracle. Take care of your lungs. They're only human. And if my lungs weren't in great shape, I couldn't have said all this. The American Lung Association. The Christmas seal people.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today we're talking about real estate and co-ops and condominiums and potentially sponsored defaults. Our guests are Fred Millman, Attorney General for the state of New York. Fred is the assistant attorney who's the head of the real estate division. And Aaron Zieglerman. Aaron's one of the largest converters of apartments here in the city. Aaron, you were saying before regarding, it was your opinion that what Fred is doing and what Fred is proposing is going to have a negative result
Absolutely.
on the market.
Absolutely.
Certainly nobody wants the value of their co-ops to go down. Would you agree with me on that, Fred?
Certainly.
Let me say this, not all the provisions in the amendments, but I can point out a few provisions that won't protect the consumer and yet will hurt the person living in the building, owning an apartment, to sell his apartment.
Fred, do you know of any instance where the actual co-op was not able to meet their obligations because the sponsor wasn't meeting his obligation or her obligation to the co-op?
There are several situations like that. Fortunately, there has not yet been what we call the doomsday scenario, the situation where there has been a foreclosure on an underlying mortgage.
Such as the mortgage for the co-op building itself.
Mortgage underlying the co-op building, right. There have been situations, though, where sponsors have not been making payments on underlying mortgages, in situations where co-ops have to pay wraparound mortgages directly to the sponsor of amounts greater than the amounts due to the bank. They make those payments to the sponsor, and the sponsor in turn has not made the payments to the bank.
Do you know of any instance where a sponsor has actually walked away from a project?
I don't think we've yet had a sponsor walking away from a conversion project where there have been unsold shares. There are many new construction projects out there today where sponsors have just either filed bankruptcy or otherwise are just completely unable to proceed with the project. And the number is growing. I mean, we have gone from in the beginning of this year, in January, we were at about 65 or 70 buildings that had these problems, and we're up to 200 now.
Yeah, well, the problem is that the number will grow more if unnecessary disclosures that will straitjacket. I'll give you another example. In your proposal, you say that a sponsor has to disclose if he's in default in any building. So if I own or someone else owns 50 buildings, and for some reason there's a technical default in one of the buildings, it could be some litigation, so the sponsor then has to disclose that he is in default in this building. And someone looking at that building will say, wait a minute, this sponsor's in default. But it's one instance. Look, it's almost as if, I don't know how many restaurants McDonald's has, 5,000 restaurants. Let's say in one of their restaurants in Minneapolis, they found cockroaches, but McDonald's will have to post in every restaurant around in the country that we have cockroaches. Well, it wouldn't be the right cure. I'm saying that the cure could kill the patient.
What you're really saying is prospective purchases for any of those 50 buildings that this particular sponsor has may shy away because he's put on a blacklist.
Exactly. And especially...
Fred, how do you respond to that?
I don't think we're blacklisting anyone. And in fact, those amendments can say, well, we are in default in 213 West 247th Street, and I'm just making that address up, explain the nature of that default,
Not my building,
and
by the way.
state that that default will have no effect whatsoever on a purchaser
Aaron,
of 690
This is all
West.
probably symptomatic of a soft real estate market and probably a soft local economy. Where do you see our real estate market going?
I'm quite confident that the market will pick up. It will start in the boroughs. In the boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens, Riverdale, etc., no new construction took place. What happened in the boroughs is a lot of plans have come out all at once.
When?
In 1987,
When is it
1980.
going to start? When is it going to start picking up? That's what everybody wants to know.
No, ask Fred how many plans he has received in 1990, and you'll know that the number of plans that are out is minuscule. Isn't that correct, Fred?
Yes, the numbers dropped very sharply, Aaron, you're right. In 1985, 1986, 1987, we received 50 to 60 conversion plans a month. That number dropped in 1988, particularly in September, the latter part of 1988. It dropped to about 30 plans a month. Towards the end of last year, it dropped to 20 plans a month. In 1990, we received 14 plans in January, 5 plans in February, and 14 conversion plans
It sounds like a dry hole to me. Aaron,
What's happening is this. So too many plans came out, too many apartments that have to be absorbed. Bear in mind that in the boroughs, we have Russian Jews coming in, we have Asians coming in, we have people from the Caribbean coming in. Pretty soon we'll have an influx of East Europeans. No new buildings have been built, and I predict that within 6 months, the market in the boroughs will be strong and viable. It will take a little longer, for example, on the east side of Manhattan, where we have an abundance of studios and one-bedrooms, and mostly because so many rentals are now available, but with construction coming to a halt, it will take longer.
what's your advice to that couple who's considering buying a co-op now?
Buy it now, because this is the time to buy. In other words, buy stocks when the market is down, not
All
when
right.
it's up.
Let's again take that same couple who Aaron just told them to buy the co-op now. Well, what should they look for to protect themselves?
They should, as I said before, Alan, they should look very carefully at the offering plan to see if there are any defaults by the sponsor, to see if the sponsor is current. They should look at the budget of
But what
the
if it's a
building and the
resale?
certified-
They're buying it not from the sponsor, but they're
Right.
buying it from somebody who bought from the sponsor 6 years ago.
Someone buying in a resale building should look at the certified financial statements that have come out. Take a look. Take a look at what the maintenance is in that building. Is the building meeting its expenses? Is maintenance likely to rise to cover expenses? Is the building operating profitably?
Sounds like you need an accountant.
No, and a good attorney will do it for
A
you.
good attorney or an accountant. Somebody should be sure to have. I mean, unfortunately, offering plans have grown, and I take some of the blame for that, for making them grow, to
Fred,
provide too much
are we really
information,
developing
perhaps.
two classes of co-ops here? One where
Excuse me, I just
100% owner lived in and owned, and the other where the sponsor owns a high percentage?
I think there might be two or more classes of co-ops, and in part it's because there have been many co-ops created over the last several years where only 15% of the units were sold, and the sponsor retained 80% or 75% or more of the units. And ironically, those are many of the co-ops that are experiencing these financial problems because the sponsor has to carry the negative cash flow on these apartments and pledges of the unsold shares to banks. Co-ops that have high percentages of owner occupants are generally healthier co-ops.
Do you foresee...
Fred,
Yes.
let's not exaggerate the problems. You yourself admit that no building has been foreclosed by a bank as yet.
Correct.
And as far as the complaints you've received, I know you have many of them, but how many of them... I know someone complained that they think the sponsor isn't paying maintenance, and that's one of my buildings. Now, they were wrong, but this is a complaint. I just want to add one thing for the
ahead, Eric.
protection of the buyer. They should also look at the minutes of the co-op. The minutes of the co-op tell a buyer what's been going on. That's a very good source
Are
of
they
information.
entitled to look at those minutes?
Absolutely. They don't have to buy if they're not given the minutes. The manager of the co-op, he can demand it, of course.
They don't have a legal right to inspect the minutes, but they have a right to ask for them, and if they don't get them, they don't have to buy into that building. It might indicate something.
Right, if you owned a co-op in a building and you had a buyer and the manager said you can't look at the minutes, well, you're going to get rid of that manager because you want to sell your apartment.
Aaron, right after this break, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it. If I was an investor, where would I put my money in real estate now? You're watching Lawline. We'll go to a break now. This is Alan Schnorman. Stay with us.
taught me to steal and to pitch. Today I struck out 7 and stole home. I think Dad would have been proud. Coach was. He said he wished Dad had taken as good care of himself as he did of me and Billy. Billy won't talk about it, and Mom can't stop crying. I don't know what it's like to have a heart attack, except I can see it hurts. It hurts bad.
You can help prevent heart disease. We can tell you how.
My father, Gordon McRae, was one of the biggest stars in musicals. He was also an alcoholic. When I was little, I thought I could stop my dad from drinking. But only the alcoholic can do that. And finally, my father got help and stayed sober the last 7 years of his life. I was so proud of him. Alcoholism is treatable and preventable. Be alert to signs that you might need help, especially if you're the child of an alcoholic. For information, call the National Council on Alcoholism, 1-800-NCA-CALL.
Talking computers. High-speed Braille printers. New technology helping blind and visually impaired people participate fully in today's computer age.
Counter moving the top of page.
For more information about putting high technology to work for blind people, write American Foundation for the Blind, National Technology Center, Box 111, New York, New York, 10011. The American Foundation for the Blind.
Hello, I'm Alan Schnorman. You're watching Lawline. Today we're talking about real estate, sponsored defaults for co-ops and condominiums. Our guests are Frederick Mailman, Assistant Attorney General for the State of New York and in charge of the Real Estate Division. And also we have Aaron Ziegelman with us. Aaron is one of the largest converters of apartments in New York City. Aaron, right before the break I had asked you if I was an investor and I want to put some money in real estate now because I thought it was a good time and the market has bottomed out, where would I put it?
Well, if I were permitted to discuss it, I'd say buy the Ziegelman Organization joint venture plan, but the Attorney General prohibits me from discussing it.
And of course that's your company, is it not?
Yes, but we won't discuss it.
So where should I put it? What section should I go into? What should I buy?
We're talking about occupied apartments. You should buy condominium occupied apartments, then you don't have the trouble of shortfall and the worry about sponsors. But you can buy occupied apartments at a good enough price so that factor in the deficit and just do some projections. So in other words, buy
occupied condominium apartments.
But you pay a higher price for it because you have less risk of default, and you don't have a shortfall.
Aaron, what should I pay for it? If the market value is, let's take a number, $100,000, what percentage off the market value should I pay for it since it's occupied?
It depends on what the deficit is or the surplus. In other words, you have to factor in the difference between what the rent you're receiving and the maintenance you're paying to the co-op, or if it's a condo, the common charges and taxes. So obviously, if it's a break-even,
right,
I would say somewhere between 25 and 30 cents on the dollar. If it's a surplus, I would go 35 to 40. If it's a deficit, I would deduct to 20 or 22.
20 cents on the dollar.
If it's a very large deficit, I might not touch it.
Aaron, let's go away from the co-op condo market now. I know you're a big real estate investor yourself all throughout the boroughs. Mm-hmm. What section are you investing in now?
I'm not converting any more buildings in the city of New York because we can't get enough insiders to buy because the profit motive has been removed, and to just own a building with 15% is not a good idea.
Where are you buying?
I've invested in Dallas, Fort Worth, apartment houses there. I'm building a mini storage in Long Island. We're now in the process of practically completing a factory outlet in Pennsylvania, in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Are you saying it's harder to make money here in real estate in New York City than ever?
Residential is very difficult because if you buy it for rental, just a rental building, because there's no return.
Aaron, what do you feel the tax increases? Every time I open up the newspaper, I see New York City is going through a tax crisis, New York State's going through a tax crisis, and taxes are going to be increased, including real estate taxes. What effect is that going to have?
The effect will be that we'll have more of our companies moving to Dallas and Fort Worth. That's the effect. Also, I want to, one word to the people who own co-ops. They don't realize that when taxes are raised that they are paying it. See, in all this panic about what's happening, the co-op owner has to become more vigilant. He has to watch his building. He's an owner now, and he's a property owner, and he has to protect his property and see to it that the sponsor takes care of his maintenance.
Fred, what happened to all those people? I remember seeing full-page ads in the New York Times. Buy occupied apartments in Queens, get tax write-offs, actually own the apartment for free because of the tax write-offs, be an owner of real estate. What's the status of those?
The Tax Reform Act of 1986 really did them in, changing the deductions that used to be available to purchasers of those apartments. It really, and Aaron's an expert on the numbers, and I'm not, but it really cut the value of an occupied apartment dramatically when you can no longer write off your losses in carrying the negative cash
So
flow.
what happened to all these owners of these thousands of apartments in Queens and all over?
They're out there and waiting for the occupants to vacate them, and they're suffering along with some of the sponsors right now.
Unless they have something called passive losses, which many of the people do not have, and that's why I was a large seller of occupied apartments under the old law, and I switched now to my joint venture deal, which is an economic deal and not a tax deal.
Aaron, do you see some of your fellow developers and converters going under?
I don't know of any major converter. I know, of course, Time had its is in
Time Equities, that would be Francis Greenberger?
Yeah, but I don't know of any large.
Well, Gerald
converter.
Gutterman, I heard, was.
Well, that's old. That's history.
That's history, because it was months ago or a year ago.
No, years ago. No, Gutterman was history.
2 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And now he went under.
Yeah, but that's history. But yet none of the people who bought in his building suffered. No one lost their apartment. No one has lost their apartment, even with Gutterman. And no one, you know something? I'm going to make a prediction. No one is going to lose their equity in a Time Equities building. The banks will take over, and they'll make the maintenance. And in the 22 buildings that you mentioned, most likely the banks haven't moved quickly enough. Within a month or two, they will make the maintenance. So Time Equities, which had this situation where they got into some difficulties, but yet here's one of the largest converters in the city getting into trouble, and I don't believe that one owner of an apartment in these buildings will suffer.
Fred, let's discuss that. Aaron just said Time Equities. I didn't know that till just now, that Time Equities actually is losing their buildings to the banks. Is that what you found as well?
They are in the process now of negotiating with several banks. They've recently amended many of their offerings.
Well, they own some buildings in Tudor City, don't they not?
They own the Tudor City buildings. They are current on the Tudor City buildings, you know, as of today. And this situation is so fluid that it changes. There are some banks that are making their payments for them to see them through. There are other banks that are stepping into equity positions along with them, and it's a very fluid situation right now.
Fred Mehlman, Assistant Attorney General, Head of Real Estate for the State of New York, and Aaron Ziegelman, Real Estate Converter. We certainly have supplied a tremendous amount of information in the little time that we had. I thank you both for taking your time appearing on Lawline.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, and this is, as always, Alan Schnorman, and thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney, author and lecturer, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions or comments about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 27th floor, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005.